Oh, wow. I think the suspension collapsed in the front. No longer seems to be holding itself up. Steering still works. That's good. Alright, here we go. Come on! Come on! So this is the first time seeing this in what, over 2 years, I want to say? The frame isn't that bad. It's rusty, but it's not as bad as I thought it would be. Come on. Man, this thing is a rust bucket. Holy crap. The rear suspension kind of still works. There's absolutely no dampening in this shock. Is that picking up off the ground? This thing's kind of terrible. Alright, the long-awaited return of the CBR 600 reverse trike project. Now, this thing's been sitting under a tarp for, I want to say, what, a year and a half, maybe 2 years? So it's kind of not in great shape. The frame has a bunch of rust on it, it's really dirty. Some of the things are frozen, there's also a bunch of spider webs everywhere, and I did see mouse turds on the top of the engine, so hopefully no mice chewed my wiring, and hopefully that's not, you know. Now, I want to say the reason this thing's been sitting for so long and I haven't really done anything with this is because I've been looking for a new engine for this project, which is true. I have been looking for a new engine because the engine in here, it's an older CBR 600, it's carbureted. I have had nothing but nightmare issues with this engine, trying to get it working, trying to get it running. It had a bunch of issues of coolant somehow finding its way in the oil pan and having issues with that. I've had wiring issues, carburetor issues, tuning issues. So this engine's kind of been a nightmare, so I have been looking for a new engine for this thing. One that is fuel injected, because in my opinion, fuel injection is 10 times better. Once you get the wiring working and get spark and everything, they run no issues. You can have it sitting for a year, and as long as it's got power and decent fuel, it'll fire up instantly. Whereas carbureted engines, you gotta clean the carburetors, and they just always, what I have found is they've always had issues, and especially with this one, it's kind of been a nightmare trying to keep this thing running. But I can't seem to find a new engine for this that's cheap and fuel injected. And if I did find a nice fuel-injected engine, would I want to put it in this project? And I don't really do that much with this thing. Not really. So I think for now, let's just stick with this engine, try to get it working, try to get it running, so therefore I can just paint and finalize this project and move on with this thing. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of clean this thing, get it working, get it running, hopefully, and do all the stuff we need to do. Like, we need to add, you know, a permanent mount for the instrument cluster because it's zip tied to the frame. We need to get the clutch working again. We need to get the throttle working again. We need to get the brakes working. We need to hook up the rear brakes, which means different master cylinder. We need to get the front suspension working. We need to add a coolant overflow tank to this, so therefore it doesn't, you know, spit all over the hot engine. And also a radiator fan to help, you know, with airflow, and possibly even some metal duct work to funnel air into the radiator. We may need to do that. But first thing we need to do is I want to put a battery on this and just make sure it still turns on, make sure it still turns over, and hopefully no mice has chewed the wires and anything. So let's put a battery on this and see if it'll at least turn over. Not really sure what that is. Hopefully this isn't mouse turds, but it kind of looks like dirt, so I think hopefully it's just dirt. So I don't have a battery that's a good working battery, but I do have this, which is dead. Will this fit, actually? I do have this Noco boost, which this thing kind of needs to sense that it's hooked up to a battery for it to work. So we're just gonna use this to give this thing power to see if it's working. Is it working? Let's see if it's getting power. Hey, it's getting power! Ah, it died. What happened? What's this thing doing? It like turns on for a second and then turns off. Actually, I just remembered I have this. I bought this for the 2-seater project. This is a battery for a for like a Polaris Razor 1000. Oh, there you go. This thing should have plenty of juice. We just want to see if it turns over and still's working, still's getting a spark and everything. And mainly just check that no mice have chewed the wires. No big sparks, that's good. Alright, let's see if that does something. Awesome, we got power. I wonder if this toggle switch is broken because it does that, and this needs to be on for the engine to turn over. Yeah, I don't think a toggle switch is supposed to be able to do this, so it's not working. So this is what kills the engine, and it needs to be on for it to turn the engine over. So I think we need a new toggle switch to try this thing. Alright, so just to be able to just quickly test this, I'll just connect the wires together. So on, lights are turning on, connect these together, this turns the engine on, see if it'll turn over. Nice! Alright, let's see if this thing's getting a spark. I don't hear the fuel pump turning over. That's one of the wiring gremlins that this thing has of the fuel pump sometimes works, but not all the time. It's a little weak, but it's something. I'm curious if this will kick over with some starter fluid. Just a little bit. Nice! Nice! It's actually running. Let's turn the choke on. There may be hope for this thing yet. So, one of the wiring gremlins that this thing has is the fuel pump. I know the fuel is probably super old in this thing, but the fuel pump just sometimes doesn't work. And I found, rip that off. Ah, there's a nice bunch of earwigs and spiders in here. Sometimes if you just do this with the wiring, so it does show signs of life. If I just add a bit of starter fluid, it does show that it is kind of still working and running. I probably should check if there's still oil in this thing. So let me get a new battery for this thing. Let me check the oil. Let me check the coolant. Coolant is, there's nothing in there. Great. Let me double check that the coolant hasn't found its way in the oil pan again. Let me check the amount of oil, make sure there's no water in it, and replace this switch with an actual working one. So it looks like it's good on oil, and the oil looks pretty clean, so that's really good. I don't see any coolant in there, which is a really good sign. Yeah, this fuel smells rancid. So I'm not sure why there's almost no coolant in here. That's why when I first saw this, I thought like, oh crap, did it drain in the oil in the engine again? But I didn't see any in the oil. I don't really want to drain the oil to check because it looks fresh. So it wasn't completely out, it was just really, really low. Alright, we got a working toggle switch again. So I'm too lazy to go and get a new battery, so I stole this off of the mini rock crawler project. We're not using it for that project in the moment, so let's use it for this. First, I kind of need to verify that the pump is actually pumping, so... Whoops. Alright, so it is pumping. It's doing something at least. I probably need to clean the carburetors to get this thing fully running, but I don't know, I'm curious if we can just turn this thing over and see if we can get this thing to fire up without doing that. Choke is on. Give it a little bit of encouragement. Ah! This thing's not completely dead. So this thing does show signs of life, which is awesome. So at least we know it's getting sparked, the fuel pump's working, so that's awesome. But I'm pretty sure we are gonna have to clean the carburetors to be able to get this thing to actually run. So before we do that, let's get this thing working again. We need to get the clutch working, the throttle pedal working. We need to add a permanent mount for this. We need to hook up the rear brake caliper. I bought a radiator fan. We need to install that once it gets here, as well as a coolant overflow tank. Yeah, let's just get all that stuff working and then we'll try to get this thing running again. So the clutch pedal does seem to be frozen. Not sure if it's the pedal moves, but... Ah, man. Ooh, there we go. I moved it. Yeah, this master cylinder's toast. Just need to replace it. Alright, so it puts a second master cylinder in place. This is for the rear brakes, this is for the front. Now, I was originally just going to put this in place. That kind of would have been a little bit easier mounting this one, but it actually wouldn't fit because this is kind of sticking out a lot further, and it's actually a pretty close fit between this and the front shock, so this wouldn't have fit in place. So next, I need to fill this with brake fluid, bleed the brakes, get the rear brakes working, and then I can move on to the clutch. For the clutch, this master cylinder is just frozen. It's definitely stuck, so yeah, you can see some watering got in there and just corroded it, so I'm just going to replace it with a new master cylinder and then re-bleed the clutch. Ah. Imagine that, it's making a mess. Alright, clutch works, brakes work, still need to do the throttle. Now, before we do the throttle pedal, I want to install the new radiator fan that I just bought for this thing. Now, unfortunately, I kind of didn't think about this, but normally the radiator fans that I buy are super thin. They're about like that thin. This one is, yeah, it's a lot thicker, and it kind of doesn't fit on here. Also, I want to put a shroud on this, so that's going to bump it out even further. But I do think if I take this tab off and just bend the radiator down a lot more, we'll lose distance between the radiator and the airbox, but it'll make it to where we can have a radiator fan. So I think it'll be it's going to make it to where it's getting less airflow when we're going fast, but it's going to make it to where when the fan is on, it's going to be a lot better cooling, and while we're going slow. So I think it's going to be a lot better. So let me build a shroud that will go over this. It's going to have to be really shallow. Then I can mount the radiator fan, move the radiator down a little bit to get it to fit. check it out. So I made the radiator fan shroud, as well as I also made this little coolant overflow tank. Now, before we install this stuff, I think let's clean the carburetors now, because it's going to be easier to get at these now while the radiator's kind of dangling here and the airbox is half apart. So let's clean the carburetors and then put them back on. Then I can replace the throttle cable, and then finish this thing up by putting, mounting the coolant overflow tank as well as the radiator fan shroud, and then wiring it up. There we go. Nice. Alright, moment of truth to see how dirty these things are. Well, not terrible. I've definitely seen worse. They definitely smell pretty bad. But there is this weird film on the bottom. Yeah, see that? So I've probably shown a dozen times cleaning these carburetors, so that's why I'm skipping the time lapse of doing it again. So yeah, these weren't that bad. Some of the jets were plugged, so I'm glad that I took them apart and cleaned them. But yeah, I'm tired of doing this. I've done this how many times with this vehicle, cleaning these stupid things, and there always seems to be plugging up, getting dirty, and always having issues. So did it go in? I think so. Nice. So back when I had a hard time finding long enough cable for the throttle, this is what I used to do. I just weld two of these to the frame that holds the brake line in, and then join the two with zip ties. I mean, it kind of works, but it's not the proper way to do it. It's a little janky, but it does get the job done if you don't have cables long enough. But I now finally do have cables long enough, so let's cut these off. We don't need them anymore. And then let's put the proper length cable on this thing. Alright, coolant overflow tank is installed. It's a little tiny, but I didn't want to make a big one and have a hard time figuring out where to put it, so this one should hopefully be big enough. Now, we also got the radiator fan shroud installed. Now, I remember the last time I drove this thing, right when I got back to the house, it started spraying coolant out and it started steaming all over the place. And at the time, I thought it was overheating, but after looking at it, it's like, no, it's just spraying coolant out of this, which is supposed to go to the coolant overflow tank, but we didn't have one at the time. That's why I started spraying out, started steaming, and I started freaking out like, oh, it's overheating. And that's why I thought that we needed to move the radiator up front to to get a lot better airflow, but I don't think we need to do that anymore but now that we have the radiator fan shroud, and the coolant overflow tank, I don't think that'll be an issue anymore. So now, as far as wiring up the radiator fan, I want to see if I can find a thermocouple. I have a couple old motorcycle radiators, and this radiator does have a little plug right here, so I want to see if I can find a thermocouple and see if it'll fit in here. Alright, so I did find a thermocouple, and of course, it doesn't fit in here. The threads in this are a little bit too big for this to fit into, so I couldn't find any other thermocouple. I'm calling this thing a thermocouple. I think that's what these are called. Hopefully that's what these are called. So what I did to hook up the radiator fan is I found a positive wire just somewhere in the wiring that only turns on when the ignition is on, and then just hooked up this toggle switch to that wire and then hooked up the ground to the frame. I also replaced the on-off toggle switch for the wiring of this thing to a key switch, because I kind of like having keys for everything. It makes it feel like more of a vehicle when it has a key. So when you turn the key on, the ignition turns on, and then also if you turn this on, it turns the fan on. So this is just a quick way to get this thing working, and then we'll, once we put the thermocouple in here, I'll hook this to the thermocouple, and hopefully it'll work like a normal motorcycle should, but this should work for now. Alright, brakes are working, clutch is working, throttle pedal's working, we also got the radiator fan installed, coolant overflow tank is installed. The only thing we didn't do that we should get done is the mount for this. Still need to do that, but we can do that later. We don't really need to do it right now. So now I'm dying to see if this thing will run, because we also cleaned the carburetor, so it should hopefully run now. So let me drag this thing outside and see if this thing will fire up. Let's put the choke on. Working. Alright, I wanted to make sure the clutch is working. Really? Clutch is kind of working. Oh. The clutch isn't slipping enough. Alright, let's try that. Brakes work. It works. It kind kind of works. The engine isn't as tuned properly as it could be, but it does it does run. Alright, so it is running, it is working. I do have to mess around with the clutch a little bit to get that working a little bit better. Right now you have to fully press the clutch all the way in, and then if you back it out just the tiniest little bit, it fully grabs, so it's a little hard to slip the clutch with this thing. So I kind of want to play around with that to get that working a little bit better. So, but also you can definitely hear a hesitation with the throttle on this engine. When I hit the throttle a little bit, it kind of just bogs down, and then if I hold it, then it will finally go in the higher RPMs, which is, this is what carbureted engines do. You know, when you change the headers and mufflers, change the airbox, just the slightest amounts, then they never run right. They always have, in my opinion, they never have full power anymore, so this is kind of just why I don't like carbureted engines anymore, but at least it's running. At least it's working, so I guess that's good. Now, like I said, I would love to rip this thing around my yard, but due to a certain neighbor, just can't really do that anymore, and this thing is pretty loud, so we're going to have to take this thing somewhere else to really see what this thing can do. Now, I kind of think this vehicle is at the point where I can call this thing pretty much finished. The only thing we didn't do in this video is the instrument cluster mounts, which this, I don't know, we just need to add some tabs to it, weld it to the frames, therefore we can finally bolt it to this, instead of just having zip ties, so we can do that later. But this thing's pretty much finished, and I kind of want to just paint and finalize this project so I can say it's done, it's finished, and move on with this thing. Now, I kind of have already chosen the color. I think having the main chassis bright red would look amazing. I haven't decided yet on the secondary color, but I'm kind of thinking of either white or gold or something like that. But I do want to have the main chassis bright red. I think that would look amazing. Comment below what you guys think a good secondary color should be. Now, I've been kind of pondering the last couple days about adding paneling to this thing. I kind of want to add paneling to the sides, to this right here, and a little bit to the back. Part of me is like, it doesn't need it. You would be adding extra weight. It's just extra time, extra material using to add paneling to this thing when it really doesn't need it. The other part of me is like, it would look a little bit better with it. It would definitely help hide all this stuff, but I don't know. Do I want to add paneling to this thing? Not really. So part of me is kind of just like, it doesn't need it. Let's just leave it an open tube chassis and call it finalized. So, I don't know. I haven't really decided on that yet, but I'm more kind of leaning towards not paneling it to save the weight and just save the time and just paint this thing. Anyway, guess that's it for this video. Thank y'all for watching. I'll see ya in the next video.